Hello, everyone. Fran here. What can be the long term effects of bullying, both within and outside the family, on a sensitive child? My guest on Hopenning this week is author and wellness coach, Kerisma Vere. Kerisma experienced intense bullying as a child. This led to drug use, later sobriety, but then back out and in again. She has written the book called The Light Switch Myth, and it is her belief, and through evidence, it must be a series of incremental steps in order to have lasting change, and that sometimes setbacks are necessary in order for there to be transformation. I hope you stay watching. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hopenning. This is the place where hope is happening. It's a joy to have Kerisma Vere with me today. She comes to us from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome, Kerisma.
Hi, Fran. Thank you so much for having me. Just an absolute honor to be here.
It's an honor for me too. I had a chance to read your book, The Light Switch Myth. And we'll get into that book later. It's a lovely little book. You've got it packed full of ideas and inspirations and life experiences of your own. So it's just a joy to have you here.
That's great. Yeah.
So, Charisma, why did you write the book?
Honestly, it wasn't necessarily a big decision. It was kind of like same with the second book I just wrote. I started waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and having this idea about the book and that this could become a book and then I woke up for probably 2 months in a row in the middle of the night and I was using a dictation device to write it down in the middle of the night and it just kept kind of growing and I would wake up and my head would be writing the book while I was sleeping. So I was really more of a conduit. But I think the what instigated that was that I was working with another client, the same themes were coming up, and I found myself using a lot of the same metaphors, using a lot of the same language, just experiencing like yet another person who had similarities to my own struggles that I had some insight and wisdom to share. And I thought, well, this would be great to put into a book, and then it could be accessible to really anybody who wanted access to that. Because I don't know if you know this, but many people don't seem to want to go to counseling or go to coaching, and many of us have a culture of like do it ourselves. So I thought, well, let's put it in a book and for all of us do it ourselves kind of people, and they can have a look at it.
It's got so much good information in it, and you take it from a variety of sources as well as your own experiences. So let's talk a little bit about if I were to ask your closest high school friend what you were like in high school, what would that closest high school friend say?
It's kind of interesting. I always felt like I forced myself. I didn't really have a lot of friends in high school. I just ended up with two, and I didn't actually even understand that they were my friends at the time because I was already quite traumatized. But I don't know. I think she probably would say that I was kind. She might say that I was quite anxious and neurotic. And at that time, she might have said that I was actually quite pushy too. So.
You know, it's interesting that you say that you had anxiety, you were neurotic, you were pushy, and you didn't even know that she was your friend or that she that she could be your friend. So let's back up because in high school we just don't show up neurotic and anxious and pushy and what happened before you got to high school in that first, say, 15 years of your life.
I do try to speak about it gently and a little bit generally because my parents have a very different understanding of the things that happened, and as much as I have learned to own my own truth in the safe spaces that I can, I also want to be very respectful of what they're capable of hearing and the fact that they're still out there. So, but that being said, I feel like my parents were both very young. My dad was 21 and my mom was 20 when they had me, but they had had my brother when my mom was just about to turn, or had just turned 17. So very young, right? And my brother turned out to be quite hyperactive. Later in life, it's actually been suggested to me that he had oppositional defiance disorder and that hyperactive was a misdiagnosis. But anyway, I don't think my parents had the skills to give him what he needed or deal with him. So very young, I remember like lots of fighting and pushing and shoving going on with him because he was fairly aggressive and fairly out of control. But then as I got a little bit older, they ended up leaving me alone with him a lot, which to me seems like a kind of a not the wisest choice. But anyway, he could be very nice and loving, but he could flip on a dime and he would have fits of rage and he could be very violent with me, and it went beyond, brothers and sisters kind of sibling rivalry, and it was actually very, very difficult for me. And from a young age, I was kind of like, splitting off because it's just like the things that were I was getting left alone a lot with him, and then I would get really hurt. And the thing is he had these cycles where he would hurt me quite badly, and then I would start crying or fall down, and then he would become alarmed and he would start soothing me and try to, and oh no, it's okay and you're not hurt and everything. So created some internalized patterns very young that were, and then at school in grade one, I actually had some friends and things were going okay, but there was this one girl that everybody picked on. And honestly, I had a talk with her in the bathroom and I didn't actually even really like her, but for some reason, I already believed very strongly that we don't treat each other poorly, right? And I refused to go along with the bullying that was happening to her. And she got pulled out of school that year pretty quickly. And then I just ended up being the next target, I guess I had set myself out as a little bit different because I hadn't just gone along with the things that had been going on. And then it was a small school of about 200 kids, and it was everybody. And one of the days I remember in particular, the three friends I did have, they each came up to me at lunchtime and said that they were sorry, but they couldn't be my friend anymore. And right then, I think I established like kind of a lifelong pattern of just acceptance. And it's not real acceptance, it's not adult acceptance. It's just like more like a passive thing. So I just kind of like hung my head and was like, okay, this is the way it was. So I ended up at school very alone and then getting bullied quite badly. And I would form connections and then there would be massive betrayals. And so at school and at home, probably from the age of like, 5 or 6 right up till um 11 when the next major thing happens is it was really unsafe. And so I got very angry with God at the time. When I was about 11, there was a sexual assault. I think that's pretty much when I learned that, oh boy, it's just not safe to be myself in this world. And I think where I took the very special parts of myself and everything like that, and even the feminine girl parts, and I just hid them away as far as I possibly could, right? I knew intuitively that it wasn't something my family could handle and it would destroy us if it came out. So I buried it and it was if it didn't happen. I think we'll talk more about dissociation later, but like that just managed to flick a switch and make it as if it didn't happen. By the time I was a teenager, my mental health was really bad, and I didn't know that. My immediate family had very not so helpful views about mental health. It was self-indulgent and laziness. But my mental health was really poor and I didn't understand that. I'd also been taught that, you weren't supposed to tell anybody anything and you weren't supposed to ask for help and you had to do everything on your own. There was some self-harm. I cut for a while and there was a lot of self-loathing. There was a lot of confusion because one moment I would think, wow, I'm really not well. And others I'd be, oh, I'm fine. And I was just bouncing back and forth. And I was very alone. And the relational trauma was so deep at that point that I didn't trust anybody. I had no sense of self-worth. And so like what I was saying about my two friends that I had is just like I just sort of thought they put up with me, that they were nice people and they were just putting up with me, and that was great. But I certainly didn't really believe that they loved me and cared about me in the way that I wanted to be. So I had another friend that I started hanging out with, and that's where I kind of got introduced into the world of drugs and alcohol. But alcohol made all of my trauma spill out, which is just like, boy, that's a party killer. So like, okay, we're not really gonna do that. But I discovered marijuana and pot, and that was like my thing. And it allowed me to be easygoing, laid back, and not show the chaos and the distress that was going on inside. So around the age of 17, 16, 17, I decided there was just no going on. I'd reached my limit. So I did actually try to kill myself. Magically, one of those friends, he called me right while I was falling asleep, and he's like, "Are you okay? I just got a funny feeling." I was like, "Oh," but I woke up the next day and I was wobbly. And I went to school, and the other friend would not stop asking me questions and finally got it out of me. And she was very upset and alarmed, and she resourced me to a place called Safer, which was a suicide prevention place. And she made me promise that I would go. So once a week, I started taking the bus to Vancouver, but it was really like a Band-Aid service, They just kind of like worked to get you to stop, which was good, right? I was like, well, that didn't work. What now? So I did a little, teenagers are so fun. I did a little experiment. I drank for a week and then I smoked pot for a week, and then I tried both, and I was like, oh, okay, it's both. And but so like yeah, that was the beginning of like 18 years of smoking pot from the time I woke up to the time that I went to bed. Oh yeah, when my mom's response to finding out that I had been suicidal was, he said, "That's very selfish. Only selfish people do that." So anyway, I got kicked out shortly after that, and then it was just like, it was just survival, and I couldn't cope with everything, the internal world. So I really just kind of put a big I like to think of it as curtains. I just kind of closed the curtains. I focused on trying to build the life that I wanted, which, like that sort of all tie into the book a little bit, is that's where some of this concepts of unrealistic thinking, right? Because I wasn't really meeting myself where I was at, and to think that I would be able to achieve all the things that I had without first actually dealing with what I had been through wasn't actually very realistic, and probably really explained the next 40 years of things only going so far. But I also, because I had had such limited affection and intimacy and connection, I prioritized relationships over absolutely everything else, even though I was kind of compromised in my ability to be in them. So I had a series of partners, and I put the relationship and them first above, I didn't even exist. Like I didn't really know what I liked or what I wanted or what my feelings were or what my needs were or anything. And the relationship, which I had decided the best thing you could have in the world was a good relationship. And um yeah, the first one lasted like 5 years, and I realized I had to, if I didn't love myself, I wasn't going to be able to. So I spent some time on myself. And then the second one lasted 8 years, and she would be actually quite abusive. And I didn't really have the skills or the capacity to understand that. And when her mother died, we inherited the house. But the first time I got clean, it was like, whoa, okay, the universe has just offered me some major things I didn't think I would ever have. And I don't actually want to blow them. And with the house, I thought, if I continue to spend all my money on pot, then, like when property taxes come up or the water heater blows, or I'm not going to be able, I'll mess this up for us, right? That was a big wake up call for me, because in some ways my routines with the pot seemed kind of harmless, because it's a slow kind of thing, right? But it was just like this kind of like wake up call of where I was heading and what was possible. So those all kind of combined together to get me to take the steps to actually like get clean. And I went to treatment, and that was actually pretty traumatic, because with my history, being locked up with like 30 other women And at the time, they really only had the 12-step model, and there was very little understanding towards trauma and other kinds of things going on. So it was kind of like a one size fits all that did not fit for me. But I got clean, I stayed clean, and then um, probably about a year later, I ended up leaving that relationship. I ended up marrying an American woman. We dated for several years, long distance, and then we got married. A friend of mine was getting bullied in the union executive, right? And she wanted me to run for a position. I ran for the position, and I won it. And part of my rationale was like, if I get home at 3 o'clock every day from my regular job and my wife is trying to build her own business and is working much longer hours, I'm going to end up being all codependent. And so I should get involved in my own thing here, right? And it was awesome because I, for the first time, got to really use my own voice. I got to use my own sense of what is right and what's wrong. I got to advocate for people. I got to live up to my election promises and do the things that I said. I would come to the table with solutions like, okay, this is what you need. This is what I need. Well, this is how we're going to make it work. And I wouldn't accept no for an answer. I would continue at it until because we're talking about people's quality of life, right? So I would just continue, but I would do it in a respectful manner. So I really enjoyed that, but it can be a very challenging kind of job. I did it for about 5 years and I've been scoring off the charts on the burnout scales for a while, right? So the fellow that was running for president called me up and he said, I want you to run for a national position. In counseling, I focused on dealing with what would happen if I won. So I was like, oh, what could I do this? And I got myself all prepared. And anyway, I got 42% of the vote. I was so disillusioned because I'd been fighting some really difficult battles and hadn't prepared at all for what would happen if I lost because the thing I was scared of is if I won. And so I was at a real loss. And I got up this one morning and it was kind of like a magical morning. I didn't know it was Pit Meadow Day and there was people. And anyway, I went and got coffee. And when I walked through the park, they had all those booths up for free things, right? And there's a booth. The sign is win 2 weeks of free personal training. Well, I had gotten to be 250 pounds in my recovery, and I was unhappy at that weight. And I'd never worked out in my life. I did win it, and it started a whole new phase of my life. I lost 80 pounds. I got super fit. I finally learned how to eat properly. But that ended my marriage. I had like a 24 hours of laying down, just hitting the wall. And then I got angry and I said, like, well, I'm not giving up everything I've worked so hard for just because this relationship is over. I hadn't cried in 20 years. I had all of the memories of the sexual assault come back. But I think the dissociation was wearing off. Physically, I was starting to stutter and I was starting to have these like need to curl up in a ball and I would just be shaking kind of things. But I was stubborn, and I at that time I still had a rather unrealistic idea of my own mental health. So I was reluctant to go on medication. Probably that wasn't the greatest decision. And I continued to get more unwell. I started to see the world through the eyes of the little kid and the teenager. And I wasn't really aware of it. And I ended up dating this woman, and she treated me so similarly to aspects of my parents and my brother that were so dismissive and judgmental. And I just ended up reacting as if I was that little kid, and I made myself smaller and smaller and got quieter. And one moment where I took a weekend and I went to some codependent groups and I was like, no, like you gotta fight, Charisma, to hold on to all these things you've built up in your life. But my metaphor is like it's like trying to keep climbing up the mountain when there's a mudslide, And it's just like great intentions, but it just took me to the bottom. And during the course of that relationship, I stopped doing the training. I started smoking cigarettes again. I lost all my friends. I lost my connection to NA. I just out of ethics, stopped coaching. I let my clients go gently because I just thought I'm not in a position anymore to do this. And then I could see it was ending with this person. And then I got this trauma image of just like this black void in front of me of endless time with nobody in it and nothing going on. And I could not cope. I I knew from adolescence that drinking could help me get through that. I was just going to go get some beer, and I got that little brain, and like they say, that's doing push-ups is like, oh, they have pot stores now. I looked and there's like, 10 stores within 5 minutes of my house. I'm like, oh, well, if you're going to do this, you might as well do that. I went to the bedroom and I had my 14-year medallion and I looked in the mirror and I told myself, I love you and thank you for this time. And nobody can ever take that away from you. And this is what we have done. And now we're going to try something. Now we're going to try something else for a while, right? Because I'd seen so many people that relapse that think that they've lost everything and it's just that those first 14 years, nobody can, those are mine. That's how I lived. That's something I did, right? So then I started uh drinking and smoking pot rather full time and I thought, okay, I need help. I was also had gone on a medication I thought was not helping me. And I thought, okay, and I'd had troubles finding a psychiatrist. So I thought, I put a few things together and thought, okay, this is your best bet. But I was really not well. And I got so much worse during that period of time, right? In my head, things were breaking and I wasn't okay. And I finally got into a place called Crest for, I think it was 2 weeks. And they put me on, you see a psychiatrist every day, and they put me on some medication, and it was a bit better, but it wasn't. And by that time, I was catatonic. I had severe amnesia, like almost like a brain injury. And I was so shut down inside. And I was also having nonstop panic. I literally had a panic attack for a year and a half, right? With the amnesia and the functioning impairment that I experienced, like I didn't know how to cook. I didn't want to eat anyway, but I didn't really remember how to cook. Going shopping was way, way beyond me. Prepping, it's like I was still kind of doing laundry, but like it certainly wasn't getting folded or anything like that. And the thing I focused on was just paying the rent. I lost access to all my accounts for any other kind of other adult higher functioning, benefits or anything like that, but I paid the rent. Just and I put Maslow's hierarchy of needs on my wall and I just kind of like focused on that, right? And um yeah, I got lucky. I I had had really bad experience with drug and alcohol counselors in the past, right? And they'd always had a kind of like, well, you got to quit before I can help you. There was a place called LCSS, Langley Community Center, and they had one-on-one counseling free. And I phoned it really with like a kind of like a I've got nothing to lose. I had no hopes that it was really going to help or be a fit for me, but I just dialed the number anyway, and they had me in for an intake the next day, and they had me meeting with a counselor 2 days later, and that counselor is the counselor I still have. And the minute I walked in the door, she treated me for trauma, not addiction. After everything I had been through the last couple of years, it was just like the universe said, okay, here. But it's interesting. I call it a breakthrough now because it kind of took me getting knocked down to my knees that many times and that harsh for me to become willing enough to actually accept help and do things an entirely different way. So the last 8 years has been a very slow grind, and that's where the book really comes in because like it can be used for anybody, whether whatever, maybe you're trying to tweak your diet or maybe you're wanting to be more active or whatever it is. But like for me, these things were actually like, okay, can I eat more than once a day? Can I eat more than fast food once a day? Can I start to get, like eat some solid food? Can I brush my teeth more than once a week? Right? Can I just get out of my car where I'm sitting smoking for 12 hours and do something else for 10 minutes? Right? Can I have a bath? Can I put on clean clothes? Can I have one less drink today than I had yesterday? That's where all of this stuff started. And then it slowly built up and it kind of built momentum. And that's where I talk about it being sustainable because these things took me forever to get off the ground and they took me forever to get back to the place that I had been prior to my breakdown and my relapse. But I've maintained them this entire 8 years, now, and I just continue to build on them.
So the light switch myth What is the myth?
Well, certainly for me and many of my clients, what I notice, to me, the light switch is it's this idea of change that maybe some of us, maybe not all of us, but some of us got taught that, like, okay, you make up the like the my favorite is that, those of us that don't feel like we love ourselves, right? So we think somehow that we're supposed to decide, well, I'm going to love myself now, right? And then poof, like flipping a switch, it's like we're going to, okay, now I love myself. And we have anybody who's tried that knows that doesn't work, right? And then we might get frustrated, we might blame ourselves, we might shame ourselves, we might think that there's something wrong with ourselves because it didn't work, right? That approach, it's not realistic. Or there's other things like, oh, like January is coming up and there's going to be a certain percent of our population that's all of a sudden going to go buy a bunch of healthy foods and show up at the gym every day for 6 days a week and whatever else change they think, because they're going to try to change their life overnight into the month of January. And I will guarantee you it's not going to work. And it's like, but the intention is good. The intention is beautiful. You want something different for yourself. Okay, what I'm saying is let's look at where you're actually at and let's build a plan that will actually work, And I'm very fond of it's every time with the clients. It's like I like to start with like the drinking water, right? Because none of us drink enough water. So it's like, oh, let's bring in drinking. I'm like, okay, I will drink 8 glasses a day for like all week long, right? And talk to you next week. I'm like, yeah, how about we say 2 or 3 days, you have 1 glass of water, right? And we talk next week, right? Because I fully believe starting slow, starting very small things to introduce new habits. And it's like, if you make it practically so easy that it's almost hard not to do, then you're going to experience a little bit of success and you're going to experience a bit of confidence and you can build on that. And what's the hurt? Whereas if you set an expectation too high, your chances are you're going to fail. That's going to bring in all those layers of all the other times in our lives that we failed, our issues with our self-worth, all these other kinds of conditioning that we have. And it's just going to make whatever it is that you're trying to do for yourself that much harder. So, but by and large, everybody I've run into, at least in some area of our life, we have this very high expectations. We have sort of these images of perfection, and we have a lot of images of instant transformation. I'm all for shortcuts, and I realize a lot of the shortcuts I were trying to take, actually were not shortcuts at all. They were making things so much harder. This is actually the smart way of doing it because it's actually more likely to work and last, whereas the other strategies I was trying, um, they seem good on the surface, but they're not. They're not practical. They don't work, and they just lead to these cycles of going around in circles.
So let's talk a little bit about, you call it a path. Change is a path, not a switch. Because when I think of path, I think of some type of a trail, but the way you describe it in the book, it's a little bit even more than that. Um, Charisma, talk a little bit about the path.
I think what I would like to highlight about that, and there's so much to it because it is a metaphor that can be used in many, because paths they wind and they turn and they go up and down, and sometimes we can see further ahead than other times and stuff, and that's all part of it too. But I think what the path really represents for me is kind of what I talk about in the book is the idea of personalizing things, right? And and a road is very prescriptive, right? And there's many people out there that will tell you how to do something. And I don't find that particularly helpful. I find the things that are really going to work for me are me taking all the information out there and then personalizing it to fit me in the way of what are my likes, what are my values, what are my needs, and then I create that path. So maybe I'm really using things that I have taken from other places, but I'm now creating something of my own. My plan for change, my for progress, my plan to move forward is a very personal kind of thing. think a lot of us think that it's more like a road where you get on out of your driveway and you take it and it brings you to the grocery store. Bing, bang, boom, should be success every time. But I don't find our journeys of growth, healing, and change work that way. And it really is a matter of going out of the house and figuring out how we want to get to where we're going to go in a way that's much more personal. So maybe I don't want to go down that street. I'm not advocating for avoidance, but if we make ourselves do something that we don't like, we're not going to stick at it, right? Or if we're ignoring something that is personal to us and try to make it, we're also not going to stick at it. So the path is in when we go for walks and paths, we kind of choose where we're going to go, right? And often we're there by ourselves or with maybe one or two good friends. And I find too the other part of the metaphor with the path is like when I'm on a path, when I'm on a road, I quite often am on autopilot because it's telling I don't have to think about it. When I'm on a path, I'm much more likely to kind of look at my feet because they're uneven ground, so you kind of got to watch for sticks and stones and other kinds of things. And I'm more likely to kind of look around at my environment, whether out of appreciation or because I heard a noise in the bush. It's like, so to me, paths are like way more mindful and way more personal. And I think that's what each of our journeys is. But it's been my experience that for a lot of us that we got sort of brought up in a culture of like we're supposed to do what we're some image of what we're supposed to be and do what this image of something we've been told that actually has very little to do with who we are as human beings. We're not even encouraged to get to know ourselves and to meet ourselves where we're at to know what it is that would work best for us.
I wonder if, because like what you say about we've been told that if we read this book, that life will just appear for us, right? We just read this book, know what it says, quote it if possible, learn it, repeat it. We've got it. And yet, and perhaps maybe that worked for our parents. Um, it was more of a factory system back when our parents were young, right? We had the Model Ts and then the Ford that was all assembled in the plant, and everybody just did their thing. And the on the production line, things just happened. It went from A to B to Z. It's sold in the car, in the market. So I think our lives, um, being raised by people of the factory generation or that type of generation, they passed on what they knew, and it was supposed to fit this mold of success. And in the meantime, the mold disappeared. It's like no longer a mold. We are this piece of jello, the jello with no mold to put in. So we have to make our own mold. Otherwise, we're just jello on the floor. So I like how you say that. I mean, we do have to create our own path. One of the highlights of the book when I was reading it was you have four imagery that you talk about. And one of them you already mentioned, like an inchworm, taking things slowly, right? One moment you'll look and the inchworm is still against the wall. You walk away for 15 minutes and the inchworm is on the other side of the room. But you've got other ones that you talk about as well.
I think actually these days, kind of my favorite one is actually kind of the staircase and that idea that I had to learn slowly because trust me, I went to therapy for like 12 years trying to jump to the top of the staircase, you know, and therapist sitting across from me trying to get me to take it one step at a time and me like big leap to the top. But every time I leaped to the top, I wasn't ready to be there, so I would fall back down, right? So there's two aspects to that staircase. The fact that it kind of can go like this, and it looks like we're maybe not making progress, but we actually are. But the part that I find particularly meaningful is like when we go step by step and we stop trying to just get there all at once. I'm going to use the word security, you know? We get comfortable at that step. We're ready to be, because change is scary for human beings, right? It's uncomfortable, it's new. So when we overwhelm our systems with too much of that, we're gonna probably revert back. But, and you could call that stepping back down. But what I find, if I give myself time to just get to that next step, stay there for a little while, I build up that sense of security. Like we give our nervous systems a chance to embody that change so that we're now comfortable with that change, right? And if we give ourselves some time to be there before we then challenge ourselves to go to the next step, the chances are we are being much more likely to get to that next step. Or even if we do need to step back, instead of going all the way back down to the bottom, we're just going back down to the last step that we were comfortable at, which no longer has to be the bottom because we took time to make these anchor points as we went. Like, oh, okay, this is too much for me. But if I take a step back to the last step and just calm and settle and ground there for a second and wait, then I can try again to step up here. And we just keep doing that till we're comfortable at that next step. And we repeat the process until we can get to the next step. And I think, particularly for those of us with trauma histories, it's just like that gives our nervous systems a chance and it respects them in a way that nothing that I had been taught until I started to learn trauma-informed approaches had ever taught me, right? There was no regard for whether or not you're comfortable with where you're at. You're just supposed to do it, right? Suck it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I like how you say that it gives our nervous system a chance to get used to it before you introduce something more. So if we talk about the trauma, a trauma past, nothing was stable. You never knew what was going to happen next. When you walked through the door after school, and into the house, you never knew what to expect. So underneath you, you've always got shifting ground. You're always trying to watch what is happening, read the crowd, read the situation, and then you can move forwards. Nothing is ever stable enough. So when you talk about standing on the step and staying on the step for a while and noticing that the step is solid, you're no longer walking on eggshells, that something is going to be pulled away. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor of the staircase, whether it's spiral or whether it's just a regular slanted stairway. You can actually feel the stair before you need to step forwards again.
I think too that there's so much subtext to the things I'm writing that you can take this book so much deeper. But the other thing that you're talking about with that trauma history, right, is like that we're creating change rapidly when we're in those situations as a matter of survival. Like I need to change, I need to do this differently, I need to do, and it's all coming from this place of threat and fear, and trying to make things okay. And then as healing from that, that idea of giving ourselves some space. One, we're stepping out not because we have to, like that I talk about that, moving from that external sense of motivation to an internal sense of like I'm doing this because I want to. Do we have that choice? And then we're giving ourselves some patience and to be there before we do any more, but which is acknowledging that yes, change is scary, change is difficult, but that is totally helping us shift out of this place of creating changes and doing these things from that place of high expectation that is based in survival, and external I better, or the world is going to end kind of thing, right? But it's just like, no, I'm choosing to do this. And it's so I'm giving myself the time to do this. And like, look, I can experience safety as I go, which, that's the rainbow metaphor that I use. And yeah, as children, what we're all taught that like the rainbow and there's the pot of gold at the rainbow. I've learned that I think mindfulness gets used across the board, so many different places to me, but it really fits to me that mindful is like, wow, there's a rainbow And here I am under that rainbow. And like we all know, there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? But in our lives, I think we all actually end up chasing it anyway. So again, that part of me that likes to be smart about things, when I figured this out, is just like, whoa, okay, maybe I stop chasing that pot of gold and keeping my head down, just keep putting the bar higher and higher of eventually getting somewhere that is gonna what? Magically make me all happy? Or I could just stop right here, right now, and just go, oh, wow, okay. Regardless of everything, like, life is a rainbow. Look at all the beauty. Look at all the things I have to be grateful for. Look at, maybe I'm dealing with some weight issues again. And then it's like, I know so many people with that. They can't love themselves till they lose the weight. And I can honestly say with the work that I've done, I love myself right now. Yes, I would like to be wearing thinner jeans, but I love myself right now, and that to me is like, okay, that's the rainbow, right? I've learned I'm worthy and deserving, and I'm going to appreciate me, that my body, it gives me air, it allows me to move, and it lets me like it gives me so much that I can love it right here, right now, without having to try to wait till I get to some destination that's supposedly going because and you know what? It never does. Any of us that have done that, set the bar higher, when we get to whatever goal we think is going to like, tip us into happiness, it doesn't. Because we've trained our brains to only identify where we fall short and we're just continually going after the next thing. Whereas if we start to spend our time practicing, like really appreciating, I'm not saying we don't need to appreciate, I mean, to identify where we fall short. We do, because those are areas we may want to work on. But they shouldn't be the 95%. They could be like the 15%. And the being able to appreciate ourselves right here, right now, in this moment could be the 85%.
So you talk about a gratitude practice that you do, where you actually do give gratitude, not so much for the outside, my house, my car, my family, my kids, but an internal gratitude for self. Can you explain that a bit, please?
Sure, that ties really into what I was kind of saying because it's learning to have a different relationship with ourselves, right? For many of us, we were, like appreciating yourself or feeling good about yourself or acknowledging yourself or anything like that it was self-indulgent. It was labeled all kinds of things. And, we're constantly taught to appreciate what we have, and we're taught to appreciate other people. But like, for the kind of people I guess I wrote this book for, there's so many of us that were never told that it's okay to appreciate ourselves, and that is what that is about. And it's also my experience that, I need some validation and some acknowledgement. And honestly, I'm not going to get it in most places in the world for the kinds of like what I was vulnerable with you, and I shared like, learning to brush my teeth again after my breakdown, right? It's like if I go to, like a normal kind of group of people and I go, oh yeah, I brushed my teeth today. It's been a month, but I brushed my teeth today. I'm not going to get you know, I'm not going to get what I need out of that. If at the end of the day, and I know that I have wanted to, and I've been struggling with guilt and shame and all these different layers that have been getting in my way, and I've been trying so hard to do it, and I finally do something, whether it's that or something else, then if I can take a moment to really appreciate that, it's going to nurture and foster more of those kinds of things. It's like how we treat ourselves. Because if I brush my teeth once this week, and how I respond to myself is to say, yeah, well, you should have been doing it twice a day, every day. Like all that's going to do is make me feel smaller, heavier, and it's going to sink me more under those layers of shame, which I'm still going to try to live up to the behavior, but it's just going to make it so much harder for me. Whereas if I like really take the time to go, wow, I know how hard this is for you, and you did it today. You did it. I am so grateful for you to doing that for me today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Then then that little part of me is going to kind of sort of light up a little bit and be like, "Oh, okay, cool. You get it. You're not judging me for not doing it. You're appreciating me for doing it." For me, loving myself isn't a concept. It is a feeling, but it's more than that. It's based in action. And where I came to discover that I do love myself is by identifying all the different ways I show up for myself in the world, in the day, every day. And they do not, that's I like to think of it as my own ruler, my own measuring stick. You've got yours because the things that are going to be hard or meaningful to you are different than the things that are going to be hard or meaningful. I'm the only one who knows, what those milestones were, what those, like I really appreciated that you did that, Charisma. Oh, you had a boundary or you didn't have a boundary. Like, I appreciated that you let me have an ice cream cone. It's like what it does. It's not based in a good or bad box. It's just like we know personally what those little moments were. Like, are we usually too hard on ourselves and too restrictive? So a little bit of being less restrictive is actually like a win, or are we too unrestrictive so that a bit of restriction is actually the win. That's all very personal, but when we can do a daily self-gratitude kind of thing, we start to learn where we're at. It's also a meeting ourselves up at where we're at that we get to kind of build on. And it's very much like kids, if you've ever worked with kids. When we scold them and judge them and come down hard on them, they might continue with the behavior for a little while, but they're not feeling good, you know? And it's going to actually really impact the relationship that you have with them if you continue to treat them that way. Whereas if you sing their praises and encourage them and really listen and have compassion for where they struggle and enthusiasm for any kind of wins that they share with you, that are personal to them, they're going to flourish. This is where we learn to thrive, and we're probably not going to get it as much as we would like out in the world. So, but we can create an internal environment that allows us to thrive. And I think that exercise of the daily self-gratitude has probably been the most effective tool for me getting to build that kind of a relationship with myself.
So you're a coach, and I am a hypnotherapist. So, what's your definition of being a coach? Because I know that when I do therapy with my clients, we look at the root. We try to, through hypnosis, we find out what's been buried that has been causing these episodes that come up later. You talked about the childhood with your brother. You also talked about some school experiences and some relationship issues once you were out of school. Those are lots of the same types of things that come up in therapy with my clients. Tell us what a coach does.
Well, I don't think I can speak for all coaches because I'm a bit of a hybrid coach. I'm educated through experience, some formal education, some informal education, a lot of hands-on practice with the tools myself. I do have education with counseling, so I use some of those skills, but I go to the root cause. If it's within my capacity and I feel like it's safe and I'm honoring the client, then we will do that. But I always think to a certain degree. If I think or they think that there's a lot more there, I always refer people to an actual counselor to work with as well. How I how I define myself a little bit differently from a counselor is part of my job to help brainstorm solutions. And counseling quite often is more focused on helping the client become empowered to find their own solutions. I do try to like lead us that way, but I also, my background was in Robert Egan's The Skilled Helper. And as a helper, I do have a bias towards action. So for a session, we are going to spend definitely the emotional component of things is so important. And having a safe space is also really important because if you can't be honest about why you're struggling to make the change that you want to make, or the things that involve with it, it's just going to continue to get in your way. But so I do believe in holding a space. I do believe in prioritizing the emotions, but I also hold a framework of a bias towards action so that we're bringing it back to, we don't do homework every week, but we're bringing it back to the client's goals and we're making sure that we're taking some steps towards action. That might be changing the goal because it didn't fit, is what we discovered. It might be staying in with the same goal until we get there. It's always looking at why we were or were not able to be successful in whatever the goal was. So the framework is more around the behavioral or the lifestyle kind of change. I might be unique in being a coach who really believes that the foundation to any kind of lasting change, and people go to coaches, I think, to create changes in their behaviors, in their lifestyle, quite often like around fitness, nutrition, relationships, other kinds of things. For me, I wholeheartedly believe that the foundation to that is also working on the relationship you have with yourself. And that's where there's another crossover because counselors want us to eventually not need them anymore. And as a coach, like I think we always kind of need support, right? But my like agenda that's not all that hidden because I'm very vocal about it is like I want to teach you how to be your own cheerleader. I want to teach you how to you're stuck in that hole. I want you to become the person that reaches down with your hand and grabs you and helps you get out of it, right? But I also want to help you become the person that knows it's okay to ask for help or it's okay to have company while you reach down and do that, right? So that I like to think of myself as a little bit like a trauma-informed coach that is kind of specializing in the basics of improving your relationship with yourself. But I'm aware that we kind of need to stick at that at about, 70% depth. If somebody is attuning to themselves and getting in connection with their histories and their trauma past, like deeper than that, and able and willing to do that work, then that's where they would definitely want to then, get hooked up with a counselor. Not necessarily instead of me, but in addition to me.
Right. So how would we get a hold of you? What is your website? And
The Wellness Hub is towardswellness.ca, and you'll find things about coaching there. I do a free 30-minute consultation. There's also other resources there. The Light Switch Myth is on there. I'm hoping to launch my own podcast called Beyond Survival shortly. And I also run a Facebook support group where I am just adamant that it's a sales-free space. It's a holistic approach, and I'll just explain that. Holistic is looking at our wellness and our well-being from physical, emotional, environmental, financial, social, spiritual aspects. One might be more important at a given time, but like this is my own approach to my recovery is that I want to keep all of that kind of in mind, right? And that is the idea is like I if we get rid of perfectionism, I cannot do all of that every day. But I want to keep kind of coming back to that to make sure that I am giving some attention to all those different ways that I need to be cared for. And depending on what's going on in life, I may need to prioritize different so it's a space where all of that is open. Anybody trying to work on any kind of change is welcome. I'm just adamant that it's sales free. On my personal page, all you hear about is the books, right? It's like book, 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 book. On Instagram right now, it's like very book heavy too, because this is, like this is where towards wellness coaching is at right now is with the book. But in the towards wellness group, which you can just search towards wellness on Facebook, or you can search Kerisma Vere on Facebook, or on Google. I'm all over. I've built a little online empire. So you can type in the name of the books and they'll come up on Google. You can type in my name and you'll see my Instagram. But the towardswellness.ca has all the social links in it and it has all the links to everything except for the new book.
very cool. And you just published a new book.
Yeah, well, typical Gemini kind of style. I had a dream about a year ago, and I woke up and I had an entire movie written. But I did a little research, and unless you have like a fancy pants kind of agent, you're not going to get in front of anybody. But I thought, oh, it's perfect for Hallmark, or this is perfect for Netflix or something. But so I was like, oh no, that's not going to happen. So I put it in a drawer. But I think I was kind of like needing a break from the other kinds of stuff this month, and I was like, oh. I wonder if I could like get that out by December. And turns out I could. I cleared out my plate, and because I had the entire thing already written, not word for word, but I knew the plot and the characters and the whole arc and everything like that. It was pretty easy. And I'd already published a book on KDP, so I already knew my way through that. So I was able to push. And it's fun and it's interesting because some of the same themes that are in the light switch myth are in here, right? She's a woman learning to be her genuine self. She's learning to identify, where she's living her life for other people and where she would like to live it for herself. But it's got your Hallmark happy ending. It's got the big blowout on Christmas Eve and the happily ever after on Monday, which, a little bit of fantasy now and again is just not. And it was fun. Primarily, I see myself as a human being, but I watch Hallmark movies every year, and there's never any with like main gay characters. We're finally making it into the side characters, the sister or the best friend, but there's still no main character. So, a lifelong motto of mine has been "Be the change that you seek." So I have written the book.
Right.
I've written
Very
the book
cool.
for yeah. So that's it's really I've priced it very low. I just want it to be out there for people. It's called Sarah's Secret Christmas Wish.
Lovely. What's the last message of hope that you can give our viewers or our listeners about where you've been to where you are to where you want to be?
No matter what you've been through or what you're struggling with, if you look, and you might need help to look, you'll find some things redeemable about yourself. There's hope in there somewhere, right? Like, the things I went through, nobody should have to survive, but the thing is I did survive. And today when things are happening that are just like, aha, I'm just like, well, crap, if I could live through what I lived through when I was five, I could probably live through this now, right? So there's resilience. There's resilience in all that we do. And I would also like to say that sometimes when everything does fall apart or things do get really, really black, it doesn't mean that it's over. If you can just keep breathing, if you can just keep breathing, I sort of feel like something's going to come along that's going to help a little bit. So that's been my experience anyway. We each carry something lovable in ourselves, and yeah, that'll be my message, okay? We all are worthy and deserving of love exactly where we are. No conditions, no doing, no needing to fit any kind of mold or whatever. Just as a human being in our basic form with all of our imperfections, we are worthy.
Beautiful. Thank you. So thank you for joining me, Charisma, and thank you too for all our viewers and all our listeners who are listening on a podcast. It's been a pleasure to hear your wisdom and your experiences and your strength and your hope. And if you are new here, please subscribe. The button is right there. When you subscribe, it helps to get the message out, and there is hope. There is always hope. Like Charisma says, as long as you're still breathing, there is hope. Thank you, Charisma. Thank you.
Okay.
You take
Bye.
care. Bye bye. This podcast and inspired healing hypnotherapy do not provide medical advice. The information included here is not limited to text, graphics, images, or other material contained and are for informational purposes only. No material in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this site.